And a happy Wednesday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. It was a frosty and a foggy start this morning. We had widespread fog that was limiting your visibility, and we had temperatures well below freezing that probably resulted in many of you walking out the door and finding some frost on your windshield. However, that messy and that gloomy environment has subsided, and we now are heading into a more pleasant stretch of weather for the second half of your day. Now, welcoming back some sunshine is the main headline over the course of the next couple of days. We welcomed it back as we got into yesterday afternoon, and it was very pleasant to finally see some sunshine in the forecast. However, we are going to have some up and down temperatures over the next couple of days. We are going to have two frontal boundaries that we're keeping an eye on. You remember me talking about them yesterday. They're not looking to bring us anything really in the way of rain chances, but one of them could result in maybe the coldest air of the winter season, or I guess very late fall time frame as we go into the beginning of next week. So we'll break down what we're seeing with that, because we have seen the models trend a little bit lower with your morning low temperatures on Monday and Tuesday as we kickstart the last full work week before the Christmas holiday next week. So here's a walk around the quad. Finally, some blue sky all out and about, and you can even get a glimpse of some higher level clouds up there just to the north of downtown Macon. But this is also, I would imagine, maybe some of that fog that is continuing to lift up higher in the sky. Everywhere else, not a single cloud in sight, but we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled to the north and the northwest as we go into the later portions of today. Temperature-wise, it is still a chilly environment, but it is very nice to see a warm-up of nearly 20 degrees across most central Georgia locations thus far, even starting to get some areas of some very light green color popping up in areas like Taylor County, just up to the northeast of us, closer to the Augusta area, but still holding on to some patches of some pretty chilly air, somewhere in the low 40s to the mid 40s. And the upper 40s is where your temperature map stands right now. 49 in Gordon and that 49 over there in Butler are our warmest temperatures here at the 11 a.m. hour. So we have seen a bit of a temperature increase compared to maybe some other areas of the country. But of course, back over here to the west, we do see plenty of widespread green. 66 in Houston, actually our warmest temperature here at the 11 a.m. hour, right after I was telling you that yesterday we're more than likely going to see that warmest temperature down in Orlando for the next couple of months. It does look like there's a bit of a warm spell over in Texas, as they are about 3 days removed from the passage of a frontal boundary. However, another one is on its way. It's not going to result in a significant cool down, but it is going to be a brief period of cooling as we go into the end of the work week. And you can already start to see kind of where the front is situated, because that's where the winds are clashing. So we have many of our winds coming out of the south and the southwest, but behind the frontal boundary, they're coming out of the north and the northwest. So they're trying to push down some of that colder air in the northern plains region of the country, and where they start to clash right here around central Tennessee, getting into northern Alabama and Mississippi is where that frontal boundary does lie. So it's kind of a combination of factors. You see the cooler air behind the frontal boundary. However, we are getting areas that are warming up with more sunlight in the forecast. And your winds are beginning to pick up here at the 11 a.m. hour. Remember, I was saying around lunchtime this morning, and that's about the time that some of the gustier winds started to make their presence known. And right now, when you combine them with the fact that we do have some cold temperatures, I imagine when we show you the feels like temperatures that a lot of your numbers are hovering below what the actual temperatures sit at. But first things first, it looks like mainly over to the west and the northwest. That's where we have some gustier winds, maybe up to 7, 10, or even 13 miles per hour, with that occasional gust getting up to 18 miles per hour in Taylor County. So yes, we do still see some 30s on this feels like temperature graphic. Feels like 37 in Forsyth, 39 in Thomaston, low 40s and some mid 40s across the rest of central Georgia, with the exception of that 47 in downtown Dublin. So let's take a look at the numbers from yesterday. 28 degrees for a morning low temperature. That was already cold enough. And 49 degrees. That was your high temperature. Was about to say record high, obviously. Definitely nowhere near record high territory, but 49 degrees, didn't even make it to the 50 degree mark for the high temperature yesterday afternoon. So 63 is your average high, 39 is going to be your average low. So we fell below both those thresholds by a good amount. 14 degrees below your average high and around 11 degrees below your average low for this time of year. But still not near as bad as the records. 2007, we had a high temperature of 80 degrees in December, 16 degrees for a record low temperature just 1 year prior. How about the temperature swing in just a year on yesterday's almanac graphic? 2006, we had a record low temperature, and then we had a record high temperature the very next year in 2007. That is a difference of 64 degrees. So quite the tale of two different winters back then. No rain recorded yesterday. Your year departure getting closer to around 1/4 of an inch below where we should be at this point in the calendar year. But also your sunrise and sunset times. Not too much difference. Sunrise at 7:25. Sunset is now at 5:29. So sunset creeping its way back to the 5:30 time frame. And I do believe later on this afternoon we will have a sunset somewhere around 5:30. So morning fog, some chilly temperatures, some frost. All of that is changing as we head into the second half of today now. Going to be a sunny but a breezy environment. Remember, we already saw the uptick in the winds on that winds and wind gust graphic, but they will continue to flow out of the south and the southwest until that frontal boundary makes its passage through. Sustained anywhere from about 5 to 15 miles per hour, but the occasional gusts can get up to 30 miles per hour. That's only going to be for a period of a couple of hours this afternoon, sometime around 2 to maybe even 5 p.m., but 61 degrees for a high temperature. Those southerly winds are going to help propel a warmer air mass into our forecast. That's why your high temperatures today are a good amount warmer than what we did see yesterday, somewhere in the upper 40s. So pretty close to average for that high of 61 degrees later on this afternoon. Let's take a look and see if the Meteogram is getting on board. Nope, it still is not. It has our temperatures hovering somewhere in the mid 50s as we go into the afternoon. I do believe our temperatures are at least going to be a little bit warmer than this. They may not make it up to the 60-degree mark, but only time will tell. That is what I was confident in this morning. I'm still going to double down on that. And I do believe that this afternoon is still going to feel a whole lot better than what you did have as of yesterday afternoon. But then transitioning into the evening, starting to see that temperature drop. At least by 7 p.m., we're not in the upper 30s like I was telling you about for the gray Christmas parade last evening. I do believe we'll still be somewhere in the 40s, feeling a little bit more pleasant, but we do have to make it down pretty low once again for your low temperature tomorrow morning as well. So satellite and radar picture, not picking up on really anything in the way of that fog. I think most of that is lifted high enough to where it has dissipated completely. We're just starting to see the beginning signs of approaching cloud cover, mainly up to the north and the northwest, like I was talking about on that downtown Macon sky cam. And here's a look at that latest update of the satellite imagery. Cloud cover will continue to push down to the south and the southeast throughout today. If we do get some clouds to interact with the forecast, that would be a big reason why your high temperatures do hover lower in the mid 50s or the upper 50s. But the latest indication that I had from Future View showed that cloud cover really making its entrance as we went sometime into the late afternoon hours, right there around 5 o'clock. But only time will tell with that. Overall, still going to be the same thing. Or same idea, rather, I should say. This afternoon will feel a little bit better than what it did feel like yesterday afternoon. So here's a look at the surface map. Looks like this front has progressed a little bit farther down to the south and the southeast. I would say the frontal boundary itself is located just behind all of this bright white and some shades of green that you see up here in the southern Great Lakes region of the country. So states of Indiana and Ohio, looks like a good amount of wintry mix up in states to the north of us that have those sub-freezing or around freezing temperatures. And especially if you get back up into upstate Pennsylvania, that's where we see some shades of gray that are going to indicate your wintry precipitation. However, as this frontal boundary is a driving force for some form of winter weather or just some very cold rain in states to the north of us, take a look at what happens as you go farther and farther down to the southwest of this front. That's where we start to see nothing really besides some scattered cloud cover. So that's all we're really going to be dealing with. We have a very dry environment, little to no moisture to work with ahead of this frontal boundary. So that's why we're only going to see simply some passing cloud cover as we go throughout the next couple of hours. But the breeze will continue to pick up before this cloud cover enters the forecast. Now we will start to see some of those longer and yellow wind arrows that are coming out of the south and the southwest. Here comes the cloud cover starting around 5 p.m. This is just right before sunset. So I do imagine that most of this cloud cover that passes ahead of the frontal boundary is going to be during the nighttime hours. So you're probably not going to get a really good glimpse at it. But then after the boundary itself passes, that's when we see this shift in winds. So those are going to be the only two things that mark the passage of this cold front, a couple of clouds out ahead of it, and the shift in wind direction. They're coming from the southwest later this afternoon, but they will begin to come from the north and the northwest as we go into the late hours tonight and continue into tomorrow morning. And that will be a factor that we'll talk about. But some cloud cover could stick around, maybe block our image of the sunrise just slightly, but I think there's good enough gaps over here in this cluster of cloud cover over to the east to where we will get our fair share of a beautiful sunrise. We'll actually just have some clouds to pair it up with and maybe see that those beautiful colors start to reflect off the bottom of them around 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Then we get into tomorrow afternoon, all that cloud cover, the residual cloud cover that is maybe just slightly behind the frontal boundary is out of the picture, and it's smooth sailing as we head into the end of the work week. Crystal clear for Friday morning, and then we go into Friday afternoon. Still once again looking like a very pleasant afternoon. However, I did allude to this morning when I was talking on the extended forecast yesterday as a crystal clear start to the day. That obviously didn't come to fruition. I did underestimate the probability of some widespread fog in the picture, but we really figured that out more so late in the evening last night that was going to be a possibility. I don't really think it's going to be a possibility on Friday morning. I'm not too confident in it because of the fact that this frontal boundary will reinforce our cool and dry environment that we have. And I do think we'll have little to no humidity to work with. And those dew point temperatures aren't going to be too similar to say what the actual temperatures are to result in some of that low level cloud cover formation. But we'll continue to let you know as we get closer if it is going to be another foggy morning. But the main thing to worry about is absolutely nothing really in your short-term forecast. We'll just kind of break down some things that you will notice as you are heading outside. First things first, it is going to be the winds, and this is a timestamp as of right now. So obviously sustained winds, maybe the occasional gust that gets up to around 15 miles per hour. Well, those winds only get a bit breezier as we head just past lunchtime, starting to see some yellow color build into the forecast. And then I think the winds are going to be at their peak sometime around 3, 4 to 5 p.m. So the potential for some gusts in some isolated pockets to say get up to 30 miles per hour. I think the probability is a lot greater up in North Georgia where you do see these shades of red. However, we do see some flashes of some of that red color in central Georgia as we head into that late afternoon time frame. Then as we go into the nighttime hours, the breeze starting to subside just a little bit, but it's present for most of the nighttime hours, and that's when temperatures are going to get chillier. Once you get down into the 40s, it's very likely that you're already starting to feel those wind chill values, but we're also going to feel them tomorrow morning. This is 7 a.m. right around sunrise when we hit that morning low temperature, and take a look at your wind gust values. Obviously, they don't look too significant and definitely not as gusty as what we'll see this afternoon. However, all we need is just simply a 5-mile-per-hour breeze to result in a bit of a difference between the feels like temperature and the actual temperatures. So with some gusts up to say maybe 15 miles per hour present tomorrow morning with the lowest temperatures that we will have, I do imagine that it is going to be a very cold morning, and it's going to feel very similar to what you walked out the door to as of Wednesday morning, although the actual temperatures will sit a little bit higher than that threshold. Now let's go into Thursday afternoon, still holding on to that breeze slightly, but I do think by the time we roll into 3 p.m., yes, we are going to have some cooler temperatures tomorrow afternoon as compared to today. However, they are going to be above the threshold to say where the breeze is making them feel even colder. And then the winds subside Thursday overnight into Friday morning, very thankfully, because we have some more cold temperatures forecasted on Friday morning as you walk outside. As we go into Friday afternoon, it does look like some gusty winds build back in. And I say gusty winds, just slightly breezy winds with those occasional gusts that can get up in the neighborhood of 20, maybe 22 miles per hour. And then we'll go all the way out into Friday evening, which is as far as this one goes, and maybe holding on to a breeze a little bit, but it does look like it is beginning to subside as we go into the beginning of your weekend. So over the next 3 days, a bit of a roller coaster ride. There was a lot that I was talking about, but the one thing that does remain the same, no rain chances that are going to be in our future through Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. In fact, we very well may not have any rain over the course of the next 7 days after we just had a stretch of dreary and cold and gloomy weather. But it is very nice to finally see some sunshine and finally see some warmer temperatures this afternoon. So 25 was your recorded low at Middle Georgia Regional Airport this morning. We're going to see a temperature increase in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 degrees if we get up to 61 degrees this afternoon, but that will be paired up with some breezy conditions. All in all, I think it is going to be a better feeling afternoon, but you may notice that breeze as you are making your evening commute home from work. Make sure that you're keeping your hands on 10 and 2 because it can start to sway you on the roads, especially on the interstates is where you are going to notice it as you are driving at a faster speed, and it can make you maybe swerve a little bit around in the lanes, but not substantial. It's just something that I've noticed in my time when we do have some pretty decent winds in the forecast. Now down to a low temperature of 33 degrees tomorrow morning. Yes, this seems worlds better than the 25 that we do have in the forecast, or did have in the forecast, rather I should say, for Wednesday morning. However, 33 degrees, good reminder, that is just right there around freezing temperature. And when you factor in that breeze I was talking about, I believe feels like numbers are going to dip into at least the upper 20s. We very well could have some mid-20s in the forecast on that graphic tomorrow morning as well. 54 degrees for a high temperature, so cooling down just a little bit. It's not a very substantial cool down. Still going to see below average numbers, only a drop of 7 degrees between the high temperature on Wednesday and into Thursday. But then as we transition into Friday, 30 degrees for a morning low temperature. I think this morning, or the morning on Friday, is going to be a little bit cooler, and kind of the last we're going to feel that slightly drier or slightly cooler air behind the passage of this cold front before we do begin the warming trend up around and even above average as we go into the afternoon on Friday as it currently stands, and that nice forecast is going to settle in for the rest of your weekend as well. So here's a look at the feels like temperatures on Future View. Feeling like 60 degrees sometime this afternoon, going to be a much more pleasant feeling environment, but still definitely on the cooler side compared to average. Then we go into tomorrow morning. Feels like numbers down into the upper 20s, right there around 30 degrees. And typically this graphic does overshoot it. So like I said, I would imagine that we could have some feels like numbers pop up, say like 26 that you see up in Athens. That could very well be possible in central Georgia. And once again, we only have the locations of Macon and Dublin pinpointed. If I were to zoom this graphic in and I were to pick apart another couple locations, you would see some values cooler than 29 degrees, I do imagine. Then going into tomorrow afternoon, we are going to see pretty fine gradient of temperatures. North Georgia mountains, very likely not getting out of the 30s for what it feels like. And then as you go into Atlanta and Athens, a little bit farther south, still feeling like the 40s, even our northernmost counties, Jasper, Putnam, and Hancock counties. This isn't a pinpoint forecast right here, but I do think you have the potential to still feel like the 40s until you get farther and farther down south in central Georgia. And that's where we do have some feels like numbers still somewhere in the lower half of the 50s. So it is going to be a cooler afternoon tomorrow, but we won't have as much of a breeze present as what we will later on this Wednesday afternoon. Then we go into Friday morning. Feels like numbers still right there around freezing temperature, so continue to make sure that you're bundling up as you make your way out the door. As you go into the afternoon hours, I think each of the next couple of days, it will be suitable temperatures to, say, shed at least a layer or two, but you may want to keep the jacket on at least through this afternoon with the windy conditions. Feels like temperatures somewhere in the lower half of the 60s as we go into Friday afternoon, and then we'll transition into the overnight hours and early morning on Saturday. It does look like the return of that light blue color, but as long as we keep that deep, dark royal blue color out of here, it will feel a little bit more suitable to head outside. So here's a look at the long-range models. Do we have any impactful weather systems ahead? 5 p.m. on Saturday, it still looks like a dry forecast, great for outdoor plans, and especially great if you did have those postponements and the rescheduling of all those Christmas celebrations, those Christmas parades that we had scheduled for last weekend first. But this weekend is looking like a much more suitable forecast for them. It is still just going to be a bit chilly in those morning hours, but it will get warmer and warmer as the parade does progress on. Now we go into Sunday at 10 a.m. Remember yesterday we were talking about another frontal boundary. Yes, that still is going to come in sometime on Sunday. I think it is trending a little bit earlier in the day on Sunday. However, the European not resolving widespread rain like it was yesterday. And I wasn't too confident in that widespread rain chance because number one, it was only one model showing it. And also number two, the GFS didn't really have a lot of the rain chances holding together, which makes sense because we're still going to have a pretty dry environment. We're not going to get an influx in moisture for this frontal boundary to clash with. So as we go throughout the day on Sunday, yes, you may notice some occasional cloud cover. I wouldn't even put it out of the realm of possibility for a spotty shower or two. But overall, this frontal boundary is not going to be a significant rainmaker whatsoever, if it even is a rainmaker at all. But we're clearing out as we go into your Sunday evening. It's looking like a great weekend for any outdoor plans that you do have, especially once I show you some of those temperatures, because they are going to be above average for a change as opposed to somewhere in the 40s and the 50s as we've had during this very long cold spell to start the month of December. Now we pick it up at the beginning of next week. So that frontal boundary passes on Sunday. Remember, cooler and drier air will funnel in. It may be the most significantly cooler and drier air that we've seen so far into the late fall time frame. We go all the way out to Tuesday. Some cloud cover could be creeping over from the west, and it does look like another weather maker is forming over to the west, but it's still going to take some time before it makes its way into central Georgia, maybe more so towards next weekend. And obviously that's getting into the weekend before Christmas, but only time will tell. We'll continue to keep a close eye on that. Not seeing any signs of a widespread rainmaker arriving like we did see signs of last weekend's widespread rainmaker arriving about a week out in time. So your afternoon high temperatures, like I mentioned, a bit of a roller coaster ride. We're going down between this afternoon and tomorrow, but then we climb back up the roller coaster all the way to Saturday. And then we start to drop off the cliff just steadily as we go into Sunday, but still not quite feeling that cooler and drier air just yet on Sunday afternoon. But we are going to start to feel maybe some of that cooler air as we go into Monday morning. So it's the same story with your morning lows. We actually are going to see a bit of a bump up as we go in between today and tomorrow. But remember, your feels like numbers when you factor in that breeze tomorrow. Go ahead and drop that morning low box down somewhere in the mid-20s, maybe even the upper 20s. It is going to be another chilly start to not only tomorrow, but also Friday morning with morning low temperatures near the 30-degree mark. Then we finally get back above average and pretty close to average. 39 for a morning low on Saturday and 42 degrees for a morning low temperature on Sunday. That very well may be the only day that we actually have a morning low above the 42-degree mark, because take a look at the cool down that we have in store for Monday morning and into Tuesday morning. These are still kind of a middle ground high temperature. Yesterday I was telling you I went on the lower end of the scale, 28 and 27 degrees. We had some models going as low as 24 degrees as we got into the beginning of next week. So I need to see a little bit more agreement day by day as we get closer and closer to say forecast some temperatures that low, but they're already forecasted to be below freezing. So if you have any of those plants that you've had to bring in over the last couple of days because they are more vulnerable to the sub-freezing temperatures like this morning, very likely tomorrow morning, very likely on Friday morning, go ahead and make plans that you can put them back out on the back porch throughout the course of this weekend. However, as you go into the evening hours on Sunday, make a reminder to bring those plants in because it is going to get blistering cold on Monday and Tuesday mornings once again, and your high temperatures are also going to be on the cooler side, closer to the 50-degree mark as opposed to the 60-degree mark, and average high this time of year, 62 degrees. So those numbers are going to be in the neighborhood of 10 degrees below average as we head into the beginning of next week. But let's go ahead and break down the next 5 days before we start worrying about what's ahead for the work week. Next week, breezy conditions, slightly warmer temperatures this afternoon compared to yesterday. Then we do see that brief cool down into Thursday, 54 for a high temperature. And then we see the steady increase day by day going into Friday and Saturday before our frontal boundary begins to move through as we go sometime into the earlier portion of Sunday. I would say late morning to early afternoon time frame is when the actual front itself will pass. I still have a 10% chance of rain, but I'm getting less and less confident in that. I imagine that Ben very likely would take this 10% off as he comes in this evening, and I very likely will do the same if I see the same model agreement going into tomorrow morning. But then 63 degrees for a high temperature. We're starting to feel a little bit of that cooler air push in with a slightly lower temperature than what we have on Saturday afternoon, but then you're really going to feel the colder air starting at the beginning of the work week next week. As early as the morning hours, lows down into the upper 20s, highs nearly 10 degrees below average. So it does look like another big cold snap is ensuing. However, I have seen signs that maybe some of the very long-range models are indicating this could be the last cold front for quite some time after we have the passage of not one but two within about a 4 or 5 day span. So if that is to happen, we could see a steady warming trend into the end of the work week next week and as we get closer and closer to Christmas, but we still have a ways to go before we can go and nail down your very early look at a Christmas forecast. And our drought monitor. Today is Wednesday, so tomorrow is going to be a day to look out for here on this extended forecast, because now we're going to take into account all the rainfall that we got over this past weekend. I do imagine we will see improvement farther down to the south and the southwest of us in terms of those areas of extreme and exceptional drought that have been lying down in southwest Georgia, northwestern Florida. However, for the rest of central Georgia, it remains to be seen. I think the farther north that you do live, we're not going to see any change with this drought monitor, but the farther south that you go, we might see some areas at least get out of the severe drought, go back to a moderate drought, or even some abnormally dry conditions. But it will be something to look out for. We'll get the release of that sometime between 8 and 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So, of course, I will be covering it on your extended forecast as we go into 11 a.m. tomorrow here on 13 WMAZ+. It continues to remain a pretty quiet period of weather, and it's going to be a prolonged stretch of it. So obviously we'll be mentioning everything that you need to know about what times of the day it will be feeling like those cold winter temperatures, and what times of the day it is going to feel a little bit warmer than, say, maybe average as we go into the weekend. But all in all, you should plan on a breezy and a sunny but a slightly warmer afternoon that will be ahead for the rest of your Wednesday. Then as we go overnight, going to be very cold, not only tomorrow morning, but also once again on Friday morning before we finally get into a warmer stretch of weather Friday afternoon through Saturday and into Sunday, but then we'll drop the numbers back down again as we go into the beginning of next week. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you back here at 11 a.m. for the latest on your extended forecast tomorrow.